So we have a set of slides that we're going to go through today. We'll introduce all of us. We have a number of students joining us. We'll have some opportunity, actually the bulk of the time, for questions, including with students. So I'd like to go ahead and get started. And again, welcome to everyone who's joined today. So first of all, I'm curious to know how many of the folks who have joined online are already familiar with ERG, or if this is your first time encountering ERG. We call the Energy and Resources ERG for short, so you'll hear me say that quite a lot, actually. So maybe drop in the chat if you're already familiar, or if this is your first encounter with the program. And that will give us a little bit of a sense of how to focus our comments. So, okay, so just a quick overview. We are going to do an overview of the degree programs for those who aren't familiar. It looks like there are a number who are already familiar. So hopefully some of this information will not be new to you. And then we're going to have a student panel with Q&A, and let's get into it. So first of all, just who's here? So my name, as I said, is Laura Kippers, and I am a professor in the Energy and Resources group, and my research is primarily to do with climate change and ecosystems. I'm also the equity advisor for the program. David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, welcome everyone. Great to see you all. I'm David Antoff. I'm also a professor in ERG. I'm an economist. I primarily work on climate change economics questions, and then I also work a lot on scientific computing. And I also lead our admissions committee and process, so I will be looking at all your applications, hopefully, later this year.
And I just want to mention before the students introduce themselves that Candace Verstkreutz, whose lovely photo is here on the slide, is unable to join us today, but she is the Graduate Student Affairs Officer, and she is the point of contact for application and admissions related questions. The email address or grad there is below. So she is a great go-to, and she's also the primary support for students in the program. Okay, so now we have 3 students joining us. So Alana, do you want to introduce yourself briefly? They'll say more about themselves later on.
Sure, thanks, Laura. Hi, I'm Alana Bala, and I'm a second year in the master's.
Great. And Mustafa?
Yeah, I'm Mustafa Zahid. I'm a second year PhD student at ERG.
Hi everyone, I'm Leanne Wayne, and I'm in my last year of PhD at ERG.
Great. So we'll hear a lot more from the students later, but now we're going to just jump into an overview of the Energy and Resources group for those who haven't come across us before, and this is your first intro to us. So ERG has the mission of research and education for a sustainable environment and a just society. And we are a small, about 60-person or 60-student graduate program. We have about half of our students at any given time are master's students and about half are PhD students. We are a very interdisciplinary graduate program. So the areas of research that are covered within ERG include climate change, renewable energy and energy systems, water quality and quantity, ecosystems, food systems, and then often a lot of the work that's done in the program has an emphasis on equity and justice. We also always have unique individual areas that emerge in terms of research. For example, we had a student who do a dissertation related to globalization of the internet. We've had a student do a dissertation focused on climate change effects on biotechnology used to combat infectious disease. So the program really has a lot of flexibility for students who find particular problems that they're very interested in within kind of the overall mission of ERG. ERG has what we call 4 pillars or kind of broad disciplinary areas that anchor the program. So the first is natural and environmental science. The second is energy systems engineering. The third is social science, so more of a non-quantitative or sort of mixed methods social science that might look something like sociology, human geography, political science. And then the fourth is economics. And our aim is to have 2 faculty in each of these core methodological areas that are related to environmental issues in society. So we have some faculty searches underway right now to help bring us up to that goal. Student and faculty research is very problem driven. So our students and faculty are really looking to make a difference in the world and to have impact. So we do basic research, but our work is often really directed by problems that we see related to social or environmental challenges. And so this is maybe a little bit different from programs that are very much sort of basic discovery science oriented. Oh, I'm realizing okay, I might be a little bit behind in our slides here. So alumni of our program are professors and leaders in national and international nonprofit organizations, in the private sector and in government. So some of our alumni have started their own businesses. We have alumni in the US and we have alumni all over the world. And we have a number of alumni profiles on our website, so I'd really encourage you to check those out, get a feel for what some of the students who've come out of our program have chosen to do after graduate school. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the master's degree. The master's degree is not a professional school type master's. It's more of an academic master's with a lot of flexibility for students. And it includes a capstone research project. So the master's curriculum includes core course requirements. So the first requirement is a 4-semester seminar series that you progress through with your cohort. And this sort of gives you a sense of community within ERG, and also really sets you up well to complete your master's project at the end. And then we have foundational coursework in each of the core areas within ERG. So we have foundational coursework in environmental science, in economics, in non-quantitative social science, and then in engineering. We also have a 5th area in the humanities, which is an optional area. And then we have an interdisciplinary analysis requirement. So some of these requirements have menus of courses to choose from, and others have specific courses that are really tailored to the ERG student. One thing I will say is that ERG has sort of a basic level of quantitative competency that we expect from all of our students. So we're not expecting all students to have an extensive background in quantitative areas, but students do need to have the ability to take 2 science and engineering courses. Might be challenging, but doable. In terms of the capstone master's project, this is a project that can be original research with a professor, or it can be some other creative output, for example, a policy white paper or an analysis for an NGO. And then the master's project also includes a presentation to the ERG community. So it has these 2 components, a written product and a presentation. Okay, so let's talk now about the PhD program. Most of the students who are admitted to the PhD program complete the ERG Masters before they continue to do their PhD research. So if they already have a sufficiently interdisciplinary environmental master's background, they may be allowed to skip the master's, but this is really handled on a case-by-case basis, and I would say it's rare. We sort of consider whether somebody would be appropriate to skip the master's when we're doing the admissions process, and we have some sort of specific criteria that we use to make that assessment. Any further coursework for the PhD is really tailored to the student interests and the needs that are aligned with the PhD research that they're planning to pursue. PhD students also will take an oral qualifying exam and write a research prospectus before they go on to write their dissertation. This is a pretty standard process across all of the programs at Berkeley, the qualifying exam and the research prospectus. The chapter configuration for the dissertation really can vary according to the disciplines that a student is drawing upon. So because ERG is so interdisciplinary, there are sort of different norms within the different fields. So for one dissertation, the chapters of the dissertation might look more like the chapters of a coherent book, and that the student is working toward. While another dissertation may look more like manuscripts or even already published papers that form a body of work. All of the dissertations will have an intro and a conclusion that tie the students' work together to make it sort of a coherent whole. But in ERG, because we're very interdisciplinary and students might be writing writing papers in multiple different fields, the threads that bind the dissertation together are going to be unique for every dissertation. One thing I would like to say also before continuing on is that ERG is really more than a degree program. It's also a really strong community. And there are a lot of social events and active student groups that sort of link the master's and the PhD students together. And because so many of our PhD students come through the master's, there's really a strong connection between these two programs and all of the students that are completing them. One thing I wanted to draw your attention, folks' attention to, is that ERG is together with two other departments in the College of Natural Resources, a participant in this new one-year professional master's degree program in climate solutions. And so I have a table here that has some of the similarities and differences between this new Master of Climate Solutions program and ERG's two-year master's degree that's been around for many decades, actually 50 years at this point. Just as a sort of high-level statement, the overall kind of essential difference is that the new master's is really a professional master's that's intended for mid-career people that are working in government, the private sector, nonprofits, who really want to direct or even redirect their professional focus to climate change solutions. So it offers a concurrent degree program with the Haas School of Business for those who would be interested in joining an MBA with the Master of Climate Solutions. And then I'll say that if you apply to the two-year ERG Masters, you have the option of checking a box to say that if you're not admitted to the two-year ERG Masters, you'd like to be considered for this other degree program. So if you're sort of on the fence between the two and you have a strong preference for you decide you have a preference for the ERG Masters, but would like the option to be considered for the Master of Climate Solutions, you, through the application process, can tick that box and be considered for the one-year program after we do our admissions process for the Energy and Resources Masters. Okay, just to talk a little bit about funding, and then I'm going to turn it over to David to talk about the admissions process. So incoming PhD students to the Energy and Resources group are guaranteed 5 years of funding from a mix of sources. So graduate student researcher or teaching assistant positions, fellowships, or external funding. Master's students may be eligible for scholarship support and are encouraged to apply for graduate student researcher and teaching assistant positions if they're seeking on-campus funding. Some students do have off-campus jobs. For example, we sometimes will have a student who has a consulting role, for example, at a nonprofit, or some students use savings to cover some or all of the cost. Particularly, I'm speaking about master's students. And then many students, if not all of our students, are applying for grants and fellowships during the course of their study. ERG has a few fellowships or scholarships specifically for admitted PhD and master students who are from underrepresented groups in the energy and resources fields. And then we also nominate qualified incoming students from Africa for a MasterCard Foundation scholarship. So just as I noted, all PhD students are guaranteed funding. And while this guarantee doesn't apply to master's students do often find TA positions, but there isn't the same level of guarantee around funding for master's students. Okay, with that, I'd like to turn it over now to David to talk about the admissions process for ERG.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laura. And I'm also just mentioning, I'm seeing a lot of great questions in the chat, and we'll get to those once we're done with this sort of first part of presentations. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is just what do you have to do to apply to ERG. There are multiple parts, and I'll just give you a little bit of a hint about each of these. So we are requiring 2 essays, the statement of purpose and the personal history statement for your application. And I just want to emphasize those are really, really important. So if you think about where to put a lot of time and effort in for your application, make sure that those essays are really top-notch. And if you are wondering about the split between what should I do in the statement of purpose and the personal history statement, one very simple delineation is that the statement of purpose is really forward-looking. What do you hope to achieve? What do you want to do? Whereas the personal history statement should be backwards-looking. What brought you to the place that you want to apply to ERG? We also require 3 letters of recommendations. So that is pretty standard. If English is not your first language, we require an English proficiency evidence of that. And we accept either the TOEFL or the IELTS certification for that. Lara already mentioned that one aspect of the ERG program is that every student will have to take a couple of quantitative courses. And so we want to make sure in our admissions process that you are equipped to handle that. And for that, we ask you to submit a quantitative resume. And so here is the idea about that. We are not using that to select the best mathematician in our admissions process. We're really just trying to make sure everybody who's admitted has sort of the basic mathematical skills to succeed in our courses. So if you did an undergrad in maths, you can just sort of quickly list a couple of courses that you took. Don't worry about this. We will not have questions about that. This quantitative resume is really a chance for people that come out of degree programs where it is less obvious for us that you have basic mathematical skills to demonstrate that to us. So for example, if you took a class that has a title that doesn't give away that you did some quantitative data work, you can use your quantitative resume to highlight what you actually did, and that will help us feel confident that we can accept you into our program. We do not accept GRE scores, so you don't need to take the GRE, and if you did take it, we will not accept it or look at it. That is a general feature of our admissions. And then there's an application fee. I think it's $135 for domestic students and $155 for international students. And then very important, you must submit your complete application by the deadline of December 1st. That's a hard deadline, so make sure you get your application in. All right, next slide, please. There is an application fee waiver program that applies to low-income U.S. citizens and permanent residents. So that is a campus-run fee waiver program, and there's a link here on the slides that you can go to and look at that. For international students, the only fee waiver opportunity that we have is the MasterCard Foundation program for students from Africa. So if you are from Africa, you can email that email on the slide here and ask about that fee waiver program. Unfortunately, for anyone not from Africa and outside from the United States who is not a US citizen or permanent resident, we do not have a fee waiver program for the application. All right, next slide, please. All right, so I just want to give you a few tips about the application. So ERG is a very competitive program. Just to give you a sense, we typically admit about 20 new students, both in the master and PhD combined each year, and we typically get more than 300 applications. So it's a competitive program. And we value that we are a small program because it allows us to really engage deeply with all the students that we admit. The first thing I want to highlight is that we have what we call a holistic application review process. So we have not a single criteria where we say you must have this in your CV and otherwise you're out. We are not doing anything like that. We look at every application. We use rubrics to evaluate every application, and then we holistically make a decision whether you want to admit you or not. Okay, so. Don't feel that if there's one aspect in your application that you think is a little bit weaker, that you should give up and not apply. It might be well that we say, oh, but other aspects of your application are so fantastic that we holistically think that you should be admitted. So we do not, as a story of that, we do not have minimums for GPAs or TOEFLs or anything like that. We always look holistically at the entire application to make our decision. I already mentioned that the essays are really important. So my advice here is to be really specific, decide on one topic or a question that you want to write about, and then demonstrate your ability to think critically and demonstrate your ability to define a question, especially in the statement of purpose, define a question, analyze it, and identify how you might have an impact on that. Another thing is be authentic in your essays. We live in the age of ChatGPT and all of those kinds of essay generating machines. I can promise you, if you use one of those tools, you'll get something that reads maybe pretty smoothly, but it is not the kind of authentic voice that relates to your experience that we're looking for. So try to really make sure that the essays are about you and don't fall into the trap of sort of generalities or things like that. For the people that are applying for the master's program, you are applying to the program as a whole and not to any individual faculty. And so you do not, at the application stage, need to indicate that you want with a certain faculty or not. We don't even have a form for you to indicate that. You also don't need to reach out to individual faculty beforehand if you, in that case. That does not mean that once you are on campus that you won't be linked up with faculty from ERG for advising and things like that, but that all happens after you've been admitted, and you don't have to do that before you, as part of your application. For the PhD applicants, make sure that you express your research interests, so what you want to work on. And if you feel that that aligns with a specific faculty, then make sure that you mention that in your application. But you do not need to contact the faculty beforehand and reach out to them and discuss that with them. In fact, most of us are so inundated by requests from potential applicants in this season that many of us will just not be able to respond to those kinds of requests. And maybe another important thing, that if we don't respond to those kinds of emails, that is absolutely not an indication that we're not interested in your particular application. It's just we have we would spend all day responding to these emails, and we have to teach our classes and do research. If you have any questions about any of this, we have a central email address where you can send emails to ask questions, and I think we're going to put this into the chat. Lara, maybe if you could, I see that you're copy pasting this. And that is the email address you should send emails to if you have any questions about things. All right, next slide, please. We have a couple more upcoming events and sources of information, and I want just to pitch those. So there will be an admissions panel with current ERG students on Zoom. So that no faculty will be there, so you will hear the straight story out of our current students' perspective. And if you are interested in that, then make sure to send an email to erggrad@berkeley.edu. To get onto the email list that will announce the date for that. Candice Grosskreutz and I will do a YouTube live stream on October 24th from 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific time. And the link is here on the slides, but we will also put that onto the ERG website. That will be really focused on specific advice on how to apply. And then we will have a lot of time where we will respond to questions from you that you come into the chat. So I encourage you to participate in that as well. We also have a lot of previous recorded YouTube sessions on our website. There's a link on the slides right now here. So if you are interested in what faculty are working on, if you want to hear more from current students about their experience at ERG, there's a lot of video material on there. And then in general, our admissions page here at the bottom of the slides has a lot more information about admissions. All right, next slide, please. I want to say, conclude by a topic about housing and living here in the Bay Area. So those of you who are not familiar with Berkeley, this is an urban environment. We are just across the bay from San Francisco. And ERG students live in all parts of Berkeley and then also in our neighboring cities. So if you're here, the transition from Berkeley to Oakland or Albany, which are the next little villages, if there wasn't a sign telling you that a new city starts, you wouldn't even notice that. So that's where people live here. Some students live in San Francisco also. There is housing from the university for families and couples, and we have a whole bunch of ERG students that are married or have even families with them. If you're in that category, then applying for housing in University Village is a great opportunity. For international students, there is dorm-style housing with a meal plan at the International House. That has also been very popular for students because it gives you a great way to have a community right away once you arrive here. And then, yeah, so that's sort of the situation for housing here in the Bay Area. It's a vibrant area. I think most students that come here really enjoy not just our program, but also the location where all of this is happening. And I think with that was my part.
Thanks,
I'm
David.
handing it over back to Lara, and then she will decide what we do next.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder, yes, we'll have a lot of time for Q&A, so thank you for putting your questions in the chat, and we will get to them eventually here. Now what I'd like to do is just turn it over and have our students who are joining us just say a little bit about themselves. They'll share a little bit about their background and their interests and what drew them to ERG. Also they'll say a little bit about if there are any areas that they can be particularly responsive to in terms of questions. So let's start with Liang, if you don't mind kicking us off. And we'll go through, and then we'll go to Alana and then Mustafa, and then we'll get into the questions and discussion.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, hi everyone again. I'm Liang, again in my last year of PhD at ERG, and I have a mechanical engineering background in undergrad, and I started working in kind of building sciences and energy efficiency and energy policy world after I graduated. So I did a lot of kind of building system modeling and thinking about energy and efficiency programming and incentive structure, and did some energy policy analysis. And coming into ERG, I think I wanted kind of a pivot. So I started thinking about, okay, these are the areas where I have a lot of background and skill set in. And the two things I didn't know too much about was around climate modeling and power system modeling. And coming into ERG, I was like, maybe I won't touch those for now. They seem like really out of my realm. And I really have no background in them. But that's what I end up doing my PhD in, is kind of the combination of those two, with the lens of kind of institutional decision making and more of a social science lens as well, which I think is not an uncommon experience for students at ERG. They come in really challenges and finding their own knowledge boundaries and kind of push through that. And yeah, I think the past many years has kind of transformed the way I think about the world. So pause there and pass it off.
Thanks, Liang. Hi, I'm Lana again, second-year master's student. I have a background in political science and environmental studies, and before coming to ERG, worked lived abroad and was working on looking at governance of renewable energy build out. Coming to ERG, similarly had a little bit of a pivot still within the social sciences, but coming to ERG, I think, was drawn specifically to the obviously interdisciplinary nature of the program and really wanting to combine previous research looking at renewable energy build out with kind of a more personal passion for climate impact and human adaptation. And that pivot has really happened here. I think combining, background in looking at big renewable energy infrastructure systems with the more critical adaptation lens has really been possible here, both through coursework and through advisorship. And I think I can really speak to obviously the master sequence because I'm very much in it right now, but also navigating, I think, kind of the more quantitative side of ERG and really leaning into the interdisciplinary nature while coming in with a pretty strong social science, kind of more poli-sci background.
Awesome. Thank you, Alana. Hi, everyone. My name is Mustafa. I'm a second year PhD here at ERG. So I'm an international student. So I moved to the US about 10 years ago to pursue my undergrad. I did my undergrad in international studies, with minoring in economics and African studies. Right at the end of my undergrad, I got interested in sort of academic research, and specifically in the field of development economics. And there was a master's offered at my undergrad school at the University of San Francisco. And that's where I pursued that master's and gathered sort of a lot of the quantitative skills over there. And then I worked for a few odd jobs here and there. And one was a data analyst at this data analytics firm that had a contract with the Center for Medicare Services. And then the other for the 3 years before joining ERG, I was working as a research data analyst in this research lab down at Stanford, looking at environmental impacts on human outcomes. And that's when I sort of really built my interest in sort of the environmental aspect of social issues, and specifically got motivated by the fact that the Middle East, North Africa, where I'm from, is highly impacted by climate change, but there are not a lot of studies contextualizing impacts in the region. And so I decided to pursue a PhD at ERG. And my research interests are sort of looking at impacts and causes of environmental degradation, but also assessing the effectiveness of mitigation strategies. So in topics with relevance to the Middle East, North Africa. So for example, air pollution, and specifically desert dust caused air pollution. I just want to say a few things about ERG. While at ERG, you get a lot of opportunities to interact with faculty. So for example, you could work as a graduate student researcher, which I've done a few times already. There are also opportunities where you can get funding, but also participate in really useful programs. So for example, right now I'm participating in a program called Environmental and Energy Economics Mentorship Program, where PhD students are paired with 2 to 3 undergraduate students who are interested in the research field. And you get to work with them on your own research, but also mentor them through the process. So there are a lot of opportunities to get involved. And also one of the really great things about being at Berkeley is that there's a lot of specialties around campus. So for example, I'm interested in combining machine learning and remote sensing, but also tools from econometrics to answer the questions I'm interested in. And I'm able to find the expertise in each of these subfields. And as you might be monitoring or following the Nobel Prize news, UC Berkeley is currently collecting them like Pokemon. So that just speaks to the expertise that exists here in campus and really contributes to the experience of the PhD or the graduate degree that you're pursuing here. And one last thing, don't get discouraged if you don't get into any programs this time around. It took me 2 rounds of applications to get into a program, so just keep going. And if you're really interested and you really want to pursue it, just try again.
Fantastic. Thank you all for sharing a little bit. And I really appreciate those words of encouragement at the end, Mustafa. We do, in fact, have students or applicants who've applied a couple of times to ERG, who are admitted. So it's not uncommon, let's say. Okay, so people have already been putting a lot of questions in the chat, which is perfect. And so I thought what I could do, I will do my best to try and be a bit of an MC here, and move us through to okay, so I'm gonna, these are some last, I'm gonna, I think, take the slides down at this point, because we're gonna just switch over to Q&A. But if people have any questions from the slideshow, feel free to let me know in the chat. Okay, so I started taking a few notes on that have already come up in the chat, and I will try and sort of dish them out to people accordingly. There are a couple that I think I can speak to really quickly. First, there was a question about Masters of Arts versus a Master of Science. And so ERG has traditionally had both of these options, and the difference between them, honestly, is not very clear. It's really been a choice of the student, whether they'd rather have an MA or an MS. Because the course requirements are sufficient generally for an MS. Most of our students are electing to get an MS these days. We have, I think, very few who are signing up for the MA. And so, but if you would rather have an MA, I believe that's still an option. We've discussed dropping it at some point, but I think it's still an available option. There was also a question about the concurrent degree programs, which I think I just skipped over saying something about the concurrent degree programs. That was a mistake. We have 2 concurrent degree programs. So a concurrent degree means that you are doing the ERG master's degree at the same time as you're completing another degree at UC Berkeley. And so the 2 that we have are the Master of Public Policy, concurrent with the ERG master's, and then a JD or a law degree concurrent with the ERG masters. And the way this works is that you can do the concurrent degree in 1 year less time than you would if you would do each of those degrees separately. And so we've basically negotiated the course requirements and the expectations for the degree programs such that the student can essentially accomplish both degrees in this shorter period of time. And so for the Master of Public Policy, it's the 2 degrees in 3 years, and for the law degree, I believe it's the 2 degree in 4 years. And we have students right now in both of those concurrent degree programs. Typically, it's just a couple of students each year. But I will say for the first time in many, many years, we have now 2 students in the concurrent law program. We haven't had anyone in that program for quite some time. And so it's exciting to have a couple of students in that program right now. So if you have follow-up questions about the concurrent degree program, feel free to put them in the chat, but that's just an overview there. Okay, so now I have a couple of questions about a few other topics. So one question was, is a publication required for admission to the PhD program? David is shaking his head no.
No, you do not need to have a publication. If you do have one, make sure to put it in because it's certainly a good signal. But as we do a holistic review, if you do not have a publication, you can still apply to the PhD, and we will look at your other things that you submit.
Okay. Another question around for people with particular interests, for example, in GIS or remote sensing, or anyone's particular interest, which would be a better fit for them, the Master of Climate Solutions or the ERG Masters? And I think maybe I'll just speak to this, or if anyone else wants a follow-up, but I would say the real distinction between the Master of Climate Solutions and the ERG Masters is that the Master of Climate Solutions, it's just 1 year, and it has a pretty set course sequence. There aren't a lot of electives. You don't have a lot of flexibility in the courses that you take. It's intended, like I said, to get mid-career people sort of in and out in 1 year with a really specific structured set of coursework that prepares them to be working in this realm of climate change solutions. The ERG Masters is much broader. It covers a lot more areas than just climate change, and students have a lot of flexibility in how they organize their schedule. So there are a set of course requirements, but those are the minority of the courses that you would take as a master's student. So it's really about what your goals are as a student, and then how you achieve them will depend on which program you're in. One other question that I saw in the chat had to do with an engineering, the relationship to engineering. So ERG is not in the School of Engineering, but we have a bunch of engineers. So I don't know if, Leon, whether you want to talk a little bit about the relationship we have with engineering.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Zachary asked the question. Thank you for that. So I am in Duncan's EMAC group, and he has kind of a joint appointment between ERG and electrical engineering. He also like advises students from that department as well. And the lab group is also a mixture with students from different engineering departments as well as public policy and ERG. And I think the question was, would you be considered an engineer? And it's a tough one to answer because I think sometimes other people consider me as an engineer. Sometimes they don't. I think it's like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like a lot of our students have a bit of identity crisis on like we can't really box ourselves into one like clean categories, but that's also the beauty of ERG, right? We are able to kind of putting on different hats and translate between different disciplines. So in my work, I do a lot of translation between climate scientists and power system engineers. And I think being able to speak both languages and reconcile kind of misunderstandings in their respective fields it's like a really important skill set that I gained at ERG. I don't know if that answered your question.
That's great. And one thing I'll just add on top of that is that while ERG students are kind of at their core these interdisciplinary people, I will say, it's also the case that ERG's PhD graduates do go on to take faculty positions in more traditional disciplinary programs that really like the interdisciplinary thinking that they would bring to those departments. So we do have faculty, for example, in the schools of engineering, around the country. And so while your degree wouldn't be from an engineering school, we are the College of Natural Resources, that doesn't mean that you couldn't go off and take a position in an engineering company or as a faculty member in an engineering program if that's what your goals are.
Can I maybe just say one more thing on that topic? One thing that a lot of our PhD students do, so at the end you get a PhD from our department, so it will not be an engineering PhD, but some of our students get a master degree, a research master degree from another department along their way. So we've had, for example, people that got a master degree from engineering while they were doing their PhD also. So that's a good way sort of to get an official thing from a department onto your CV and learn those skills. And then we also have the system of designated emphasis in your PhD where you can, and that's a bit complicated, so I'm not going to go into the details, but there's another way to get an ERG PhD, but add sort of a signal that you are really deep in a specific area.
It's sort of like a minor for
Yeah.
if you're familiar with undergraduate, minor degrees. It's sort of like a minor attached to a PhD. And that's, pretty common. Okay, another question we had was about scholarships available to master's students and when you'd apply for those and grants. I don't know if any of the students want to speak to grants or scholarships that they applied for. Alana, have you applied to any?
I have, yeah. Yeah, I guess I know the question was kind of the timeline of applying for things. You don't apply for graduate student research or graduate student instructor positions until you're admitted into ERG. And that starts kind of immediately after you decide to come. Like I think I decided in April to join, and then immediately once I got my ERG email, was inundated with things for the fall and was applying for those throughout the summer. For master's students, other grant opportunities, I've gotten really lucky at ERG. I definitely think the key at Berkeley is there are just so many resources, but you have to be really proactive in looking for them and really proactive in applying early. I applied for pretty topical grants. I do work in Southeast Asia. And so pretty immediately upon arriving at ERG, like truly September, was applying to both grants for within the Southeast Asia Studies program and different environmental resources at Berkeley, and got a bunch of funding for summer fieldwork through both the Southeast Asia Studies Department and the Student Environmental Resource Council. But those were all like October applications for the following summer. And so definitely the key, I think, is to be proactive, especially as a master's student. I'm also lucky I work closely with my academic advisor and was funded through her for the summer, and then got additional grants to do additional fieldwork. But especially for master's students without kind of a guaranteed funding source throughout the summer, it's definitely key, I think, to be really proactive when you get to Berkeley. And I would say ERG students are really helpful in sending different opportunities in our shared listservs and things like that. But yeah, they're both nodding. Definitely being proactive, I think, is the key.
Great, thanks.
Can I just add one thing? So I think there are some things that you do need to look into. So there are some fellowships that you need to indicate in your application that you're interested in them, and then there are others where we can allocate and you don't have to do anything special in your application. And the best source of information for that is if you go onto the ERG website under graduate programs. There's a section that is called Financing Your Education, and that has a list of the options that we have, and you can find more information there.
Great. Okay. There's a question about like how interdisciplinary can people be in terms of the coursework that they do. So one of the students wanted to tackle that. Maybe Mustafa, I'll throw that to you.
Yeah, for sure. I can list some of the classes I've taken so far. So I've taken econometrics from the Agricultural Resource Economics Department. I've taken a machine learning course from the Information School. I've taken a remote sensing class at the Landscape Architecture Department. Right now I'm taking an air quality engineering course at the Civil Engineering Department. So these are 4 departments already that are separate entities within Berkeley, but offer classes that complement my interest. And ERG also offers a lot of classes that sort of combine these multiple disciplines. So there is the Energy and Society course that is offered through ERG, the environment, was the environment and data, it's someone will remember the name here, but that course also offers sort of machine learning with environmental and energy topics as well. Yeah, these are some of the courses I've taken.
That's great. So just to emphasize, UC Berkeley, as they say, is your oyster. You can take any course that you like, and you have a lot of flexibility. It's all about what fits with what your interests and goals are for the degree program. We have a couple of questions about people coming or applying with non-traditional backgrounds or who have been out of school for a while, and how we consider different applications, or students who maybe have a BFA and so David, could you just say a little bit about the application process and how students who are applying how all these diverse students get considered in the application process? Because we do have a very diverse applicant pool.
So I think maybe these are sort of broad questions, but I'll start with sort of people that have been out of school for a while. Maybe that is sort of, because that is very typical. So that is not a drawback for an application. On the contrary, I think we really like to see people that have done an undergrad, then went out and worked a couple of years, gained real world experience. A lot of the admitted class that we have would fall into that category. We also take people directly out of undergrad, but I think that is actually fewer students than people that have worked. We also have people that have worked for 10, 15 years and come back to grad school. So there's really no hard rule about any of this. We look at each application holistically, and we try to compose a cohort where there is an interesting mix of people that will benefit from the program. In the same vein, you don't have to have an undergraduate in a specific topic or subject or discipline. The ERG Master's Program is a great opportunity to pivot in your career. We've had many examples of people that came with an undergraduate in one thing and then did a PhD in a very different thing. So just as an example, Lara and I had a joint a student that we both advised. She came in with an English literature undergraduate degree, and she's now a quantitative disease modeling expert. So there's really a lot of flexibility in our program. I think we want to hear a coherent story why you want to pivot, right? So tell us in your essays. If you have an English literature undergraduate degree, why you want to do work on something quantitative. But there is really, we spend a lot of time on reading each application and looking at each application, and we do not have any stage in the application process where we go through something and say, oh, if this file doesn't have feature X, then we put it aside. That's not how we do admissions. So this is not very specific, but I think that's sort of, so I think when in doubt, I think if anything, there are probably people that think, oh, my profile is not right for this program, and you might be mistaken in that. Okay, I would actually really encourage. I think we are really open to very non-traditional. If anything, we find sort of meandering CVs and paths interesting. You know, that can really sort of enrich our cohort. So don't feel like if you didn't have the straight path from, you know, an early age on that you should not apply. That is not the case.
If I may add, so there's a student in our cohort who came straight from undergrad with a sort of background in arts from the New School in New York. So there's that possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Let's see, there were some specific, there was a question about the courses and the list of courses that students can choose from. And I just wanted to highlight for the individual requirements that we have, course requirements. We have internal lists that are always changing, I would say. I think if we sort of circulated that list on the internet right now, it would be immediately out of date. So I'm not going to be able to point you to a specific list, but suffice it to say, there are a number of course options for some of the requirements. We do have a couple of requirements that have more limited options. And we are also sort of always open to hearing from students if there is a new course being offered on campus that really fulfills both the sort of the letter and the spirit of the requirement to considering adding a new course to the list of options for courses that do have or for requirements that do have options. So because there are always new faculty coming on campus offering new things, and so we have some flexibility there. There have been a few questions about like deciding between the Master of Climate Solutions and the ERG Masters, and I think this is a very a bit of a personal decision. I think, like I said, if you're on the fence and you feel that if you were admitted to ERG, you would prefer to do the ERG program, which is this longer, more sort of academically oriented master's, then I would really encourage you to apply to ERG and then indicate that you'd be open to being considered for the Master of Climate Solutions. And in that case, what would happen is, you know, we review all of our applications first, and then if for some reason you didn't make it into the ERG cohort, then the incoming master's cohort, then we would pass your application over to the Master of Climate Solutions application review process, and you could be considered there. So we don't right now have a path in the other direction where somebody might first apply to the Master of Climate Solutions and then apply to our program, but if you're someone that sort of sees yourself fitting into either of those two programs, then you have that opportunity to be considered in the way I just mentioned. And again, I think you just have to do some internal work to think about, is what you're looking for a very sort of narrowly focused degree program that has little less flexibility in terms of the coursework that you do, but can get you in and out in a year and help kind of help you launch on that path toward professional work in climate solutions? Or are you looking for a more broadly interdisciplinary program that goes beyond something that would just be focused on climate solutions and have a more academic dimension to it? I will say that ERG's, while it's an academic master's, we call it a more academic master's, the vast majority of our master's students are not going on to a PhD somewhere else. They are going back out into the public sector, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, to really apply what they've learned and developed in graduate school, and kind of further their aims in the work world, as opposed to continuing, on in graduate school. So we do have, a handful of students finishing the master's each year who will apply to PhD programs, both at ERG, at other programs on campus at Berkeley, and also programs, around the country and around the world. So that is an option for students. And that's maybe particularly valuable to do the master's first. If students are interested in pivoting to a new field, they have the opportunity to use ERG for that part of their trajectory. But like I said, the majority of the students in the master's are not continuing on to the PhD. Okay, let's see, other questions that we can address.
Can I, because I think I will have to leave it in 1.5 minutes.
Oh, it's already 1.5 minutes.
Yes.
Yes, we only have 1.5 minutes left. Last.
So I just want to say one thing. I think, Lara, you can save the chat text, and then maybe what I will do with Candace is take those questions that we didn't get to and try to address some of them in the next live stream that we have on October 24th. So that, yeah, so if your question didn't get addressed now, that is one way that we'll try to get to them later.
Perfect. That's a great idea. Yes. And thank you, everyone. I think because we are coming up at the end of our time, I'm going to just drop a bunch of links into the chat to help folks find what they need. There's a lot of information on our website. And for those of you who visited our website in prior weeks, let's say, and found it wanting, we have a full website backup. There's a lot more information there. It's still not totally complete. We are still bringing some of the pieces back into play, but I'd really encourage you. We have a lot of rich information on the website about the admissions process, about the degree program, and about all the different opportunities you could have here. So yes, thank you all for joining, and join some of our other follow-up events.